Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to my shop. Today we're talking about the Stanley number 48. This is a really cool swing arm tongue and groove plane. This will cut both the tongue and the groove depending upon how the fence is put on there. So let's actually dive in and take a look at this really sweet tool. The Stanley 48 comes in a couple different varieties used for different width boards. Now the most common varieties is actually one designed for 7/8 inch boards. And it has a 5/16 cutter, a 5/16 gap, and then a 5/16 cutter. 7/8 used to be a really common board thickness, but nowadays more people are using the 3/4 inch thickness. And so you can use a 7/8 board on a 3/4 inch thickness, but the groove isn't going to be in the center of the board, it's going to be off to the side a little bit. Not a huge problem, but that really drives some people crazy. On top of that, they also came out with the 1.25 inch variety, which is what I have here. And that has a 5/16 cutter, a 5/16 gap, and then a 5/8 cutter. So this will cut 1.25 inches wide, though the gap will be off to the center. This one is probably the most versatile because it can do the 7/8 as well as anything wider up to 1.25 inches wide. And if you really want to, you can still do the 3/4 inch, just understanding that the gap isn't going to be in the center of the board. That's why I really like this variety, and it's a little bit more flexible for what I do. Now, Lie-Nielsen also makes a new version of this, and it is nice and shiny, and it's fairly expensive, but it also comes in two different varieties. It comes in what they call the 48, which is for 3/4 inch boards. And then it also comes in, I think they call it the 41, and that is for 1/2 inch wide boards. So that's something that is very hard to find. Stanley did make them for 1/2 inch wide, but they're really rare and hard to come by. My particular one is missing a knob that goes in the front, so it's like a normal plain knob. And one of these days I'll put one on there. There is a threaded insert, so I can thread in one here. But I don't use the knob that much. When I'm grabbing it, I'm normally just holding up here as if I would be holding the base of the knob, but instead I'm just going to be holding the retention screw. So how exactly does this thing work? There is a pin up here you can pull, and then this fence spins around. And the fulcrum of the fence is off center of it. So in this orientation, the fence is set up here so I can cut the tongue of the board, and then I can flip it around. And in this orientation, I can cut the groove of the board. You can see how the fence is now in line with that. The sharpening on this is actually rather easy. Just loosen up the thumb screws on here and slide them out. The new Lie-Nielsen, actually, these two irons are one piece and they're joined at the top, and there's only one lever cap. For the two irons, they're going to be sharpened basically just like a Stanley 45 or a regular chisel. It just has a bevel and a flat. In this case, I need to do a little work on the back, so we're going to clean up the back, make sure that's all good, and then hit the bevel. After a little while, you can see the shininess on here. I'm hitting back here and up here. There's a valley here that's not a problem as long as it's shiny all the way across the tip. So you can move on to the next grit and the next grit. Make them shiny. Now that the backs are flattened, we can then move on to the bevel. Same step. Just find where that bevel angle is, lock your arms, everything down, and grind it out. Then, of course, onto the final strop. Run it until you grind that burr right off. A little bit on the back, a little bit on the front, a little bit on the back, and we're ready to go. Then for reassembly, this is actually really easy because you can just slide it in, push it up against the inside feed. And I don't want the iron to be sticking out. I want it to be a little bit pulled back. And I can tighten it down, do the same thing on the other side. And the reason that this works is that the space between the two irons is the exact same thickness as the space of the second iron. So the gap in between the two irons is the exact same thickness as this one. Again, I'm going to put it in. I don't want it sticking out the mouth. I want to leave it back a little ways, and that way I can adjust it forward. Then for the final adjustment, I'm just going to bring in a hammer here and lightly tap them forward, and until they stick out past the skate. To judge that, I'm going to get down and eyeball them, and I just want them sticking out just a hair, just a single shaving. We don't want to be taking off too much, otherwise you get these coarse cuts. And it is very important that the two of them stick out the same amount. We want them to be cutting equally. So just eyeball that down, and then once they're at, just give them a final tap to set them against the middle. Lock them down. Do the same thing on the other side. So let's put this beast to the test and cut some 3/4 inch board. Now this is actually a little bit thinner than 3/4 inch, which isn't a huge issue. It's probably about the smallest I would put through this. Now this is my reference face because this side is a little bit uneven. And this is what will be the top of the table if we're going to be tongue and grooving these together. So I always want the fence to reference off the same side. That way the groove and tongue are the same distance in from one side. So let's start with this board and continue on. In this case, I'm going to start with the tongue, and I'm going to be putting pressure against the fence here. It is very important that the fence stay at 90 degrees so that the plane doesn't tip one way or the other. You can see how this goes pretty quickly once it's been sharpened. And there we go, we're down to depth. The nice thing about this is as long as you don't adjust the cutters, it's always going to cut to the same depth, which is the bottom of the sole. Now we can pull the pin, flip it around, and cut the groove. Same thing all the way across. Keep it tight. And on one of these, you're usually going to be running against the grain, unless you orient your boards. It's just the way it is. I usually like to make the groove running against the grain so that all the tear out is hidden down at the bottom, as opposed to up on the shoulders. Then you got these two pieces, put them together, and voila, you have a tongue and groove that matches up nicely. A nice flat surface across here. Then we can do the same thing with the 7/8 inch thick board. Plane it down. Then spin it around, and we can do the groove. Then we can throw it in there and see how close is it. Ooh, like a glove. Like a glove. That is what I'm looking for right there. Then if you really wanted this to look extra pretty, you could put in a bead on one side or the other and give that beadboard look so you have the tongue and groove fit. But that is how it goes together. It's actually a really nice joint, nice and clean across. There's a little bit of a lip here, but one pass of the plane and that'd be completely smooth. You can see just how much fun this really is, and it's a very slick, quick tool. Anytime you want to make a tongue and groove that matches perfectly every time, just swing the fence around and you're ready to go. It's all measured off the groove being the same thickness as the second tongue, or second groove being the same thickness as the tongue, depending on which way you're cutting. It used to be that you could pick these up for 20, 25 bucks that were rusted and needed a little bit of work and you'd be good to go. Nowadays, the price has gone up. This one was $35, missing the handle with a decent amount of rust. I had to do some cleanup on it. You can usually find them for around $40, $45, $50 in good condition and ready to go. But sometimes you're going to have to look around. Now, if you're on eBay, yes, the price is going to be far more. But if you go to some place like a Midwest Tool Collectors Meet or one of the other tool sales, you'll usually find 5 or 6 of these around and get a fairly decent price on it. If you don't know what the Midwest Tool Collectors is, you've got to look it up. It is a collecting club, mostly in central United States, but we do have some on the East Coast and some on the West Coast. And there are several other clubs as well on the West Coast and the East Coast and down south. But the Midwest Tool Collectors is by far the biggest, and it's a club devoted to collecting tools. And they have regular meets where you can go and buy them. Now, you do have to be a member of the club, and then you do have to pay at the meet to get in, and that way you can get around taxes and other insurance issues. But they are the place where I've probably purchased most of my tools. If you want to find out more information on that, I'll leave a link to them down below, as well as a page on my website where I have listed all the sources I know of where you can buy antique hand tools. I'll leave a link to that down below as well. If this isn't your style and you actually want to make one, I do have a couple old videos where I made a set of tongue and groove. I made them for a friend of mine, John, who helped me out. He's actually the guy who got me my Stanley number 55. You've been a huge help to the channel. And if you want to see that, I'll leave a link to those videos down below. I do have to warn you, they are a little older, and so the video style is very different. But some people still like that style. So that's about it for today. I'd love to hear your thoughts and ideas, questions. I'm sure there's a whole pile of them, as this is such an interesting tool, and there's a bunch of things of, can you do this, can you do that? Let me know down below. Also, if there's some tool you'd like me to demonstrate or show more of, please let me know, and I might add it to the list. I like doing these, and they're kind of fun to add to the history. So, hope you enjoyed this tool as much as I did, and until next time, have a wonderful day. I bet you didn't know that Stanley made the original fidget spinner. Yes, I do leave it on my bench and play with it from time to time.